Hey everyone, it's Kate, and today I'm going to start sewing the Camber dress out of our wool pinstripe in navy for Rachel. She and I pin fit it the other day, and I'll talk about what happened with the fabric when I sew the side seams next week-ish. But today I'm just going to do the darts and the front neckline. Before I start on those, I want to mention that I stay stitched the neck edges. This was not part of the instructions, but because the neck edges are on the bias or across the bias, they can stretch out. So these are the back yoke pieces. And when I stay stitch a neck edge, I start at the shoulder seam and go to the center. I have white thread in my top and then blue thread in the bobbin. So you can see that I went to the center, and then on the other side, once again, I started at the shoulder seam and sewed to the center because that really keeps it from stretching out. And I did it within the seam allowance at about 3/8 of an inch. The seam allowances on this project are 5/8 of an inch. So let's go to the sewing machine, and I am going to talk about sewing the darts. I've sewn one of the darts off camera, and I'm going to do the other one on camera. So I have pinned the dart right sides together. I do a little notch at the side seam, and I can match up those notches, and then I have my tailor's tack at the tip of the dart. And I've pinned it right sides together. And I don't draw my dart lines, partly because I like to do everything super fast, but also I love this little method. I actually learned it from Colette, which is now called Seamwork, years and years ago. But you can, I'm going to pull up the bobbin thread from the bottom. And unfortunately, it's navy blue, so you're not going to see really well, but I'll try to describe it well in words. So I'm pulling the bobbin thread from the bottom, and I'm going to move the top thread, which is the white thread, off to the side. And I'm just getting enough bobbin thread so that I can I'm going to hold it at the tip of the dart, and then I can just follow my bobbin thread to the dart, the tip of the dart. So I'm going to do a couple stitches forward, couple back. And I'm using one of our superior top stitching needles for this project. As I said, I did some experimenting with different needles just to make sure that I liked the way they were behaving, and they all kind of worked fine. So I stuck with my favorite needle, which is our superior top stitching ones. I've got the dual feed on because this is a FOF, and I love a dual feed. So I am reaching the tip of the dart, and if you're like me, sometimes when you make darts, they end up being there's a pokey point to them, which you don't want on your garment. And so to avoid that, I'm going to reduce my stitch length in here at the end, and I am going to just super carefully, slowly get to the tip of the dart, and I'm sewing parallel to the fold of the fabric and then right off so that there's not a huge angle at the end. And the small stitches also kind of keep it from unraveling, or what's the right word, coming apart at the tip. You do want to avoid back stitching at the tip of a dart because that just adds some bulk there that can increase your chances of having a pointy dart. So off camera, I will tie these little threads in a knot. But now let's go over and press the dart in place. So I love a tailor's ham. You will see me use it a lot. I'm going to do it this way so you can see my stitching. And it's great for shoulder seams. I think that's why it was invented, for tailors to make men's clothes. But it's also shaped like a certain lady part, which makes pressing your darts really pretty easy. So I press it right as I sewed it to make a little crease in the bottom of the dart. And I'm going to use my press cloth and get that crease to form a little better. This wool flannel is really nice to sew with, but it's a little bit springy. As I said, wool is really just sheep hair, curly sheep hair. So there's kind of a springiness to it that it takes a little work to make it create a good crease. All right, so here's my tailor's tack, which I can just pull right out. I used our kimono silk thread, so it's super easy to pull it out. So now some of you might be upset that I didn't match the stripes on this dart, but you know, the darts really worked well for Rachel. It really fit well, and I didn't want to move them around and worry about the stripes. I think we'll add some interest to the dress and won't be a bad thing. So I just kind of get the dart in place on the ham, and I'm pressing pretty gently, and I'm going to let it cool with my hand on top. And I do have a little bubble right there, which I don't like. So I'm just going to get it on a different part of the ham and see if I can get that out. I'm just going to steam it without the press cloth. And then let it cool. So you do need to spend a little time with your darts to get them pressed nicely. You can try on the garment at this point and see how the dart looks. I always end up trying things on so many times that I never trim the fold of my dart because I'm always afraid that I'll want to change it someday. But so that is how you sew a dart and press it on a ham. Next, I'm going to do the front neckline. So I mentioned while I was cutting it out that I was concerned that the neck binding was so short. And that's because it's only for the front of the neckline. We'll do the back of the neckline next week, because it's part of the yoke. So I have this nice bias strip, and you can see that it's bias. It has a little stretch. It's got the nice diagonal stripes. And you're supposed to fold both of the long edges to the center. This sounds really easy, but it was a little bit hard for me. I did it off camera because it took a minute. And you can see it's like bouncing up, I think because there's not really any weight to hold it down. But I used a lot of steam, and I let it cool under. See, it just pops right back up. So I just get it back in place and let it cool under the clapper so that it will sort of stay. And it doesn't, but that's okay. So after you press wrestle with the the binding and press it, I have sewn it to the front of the dress. The first pass is you sew the right side of the binding to the wrong side of the fabric. Hopefully you can see that these pinstripes are really dark and these are light. This is the wrong side of the front. And I have sewn in one of the grooves that I pressed, that I sort of pressed. It's about at 3/8 of an inch, and I have sewn it to the dress. And now comes one of the scary parts. Rachel discovered how scary it is this morning. So one of the most important things you need to do when you're sewing is trim your seam allowance and grade them. Oh, another point is that this bias binding is going to be a little bit long. And it's going to be a little long, and so it will hang off the top of the shoulder seam. So I'm just going to trim it right here at the shoulder seam. So poor Rachel decided to do a quick little project before she came to work, and she was trimming her grain line Scout tee and trimmed into the garment and not just in the seam allowance, which I have done before. So hopefully, here's fingers crossed that I won't do it this time. So you want to trim this seam allowance, and the instructions don't have you grade it, but I'm going to show you how to grade it. So what I do for grading is carefully trim both seam allowances about 1/8 of an inch. So I've just sewn this at 3/8, so I don't have a ton to play with. So I'm trimming them both. And then I'm going to trim the bias strip seam allowance a little bit more than the dress seam allowance. So the rule of thumb is on your facing, which this bias binding is, you want to trim a little bit more so that and that's what's called grading. And what it does is make kind of I think of it as a stair step instead of a steep drop off. So when you press your facing, you won't see that seam from the right side of your garment. And it's always terrifying to do this, but it's extra terrifying when I have to hold it in a funny way. Can everybody see what I'm doing? Good. And you can see that it's not a beautiful cut. You don't have to worry about it. I teach some grading methods in my Learn to Sew class, my 6-week Learn to Sew class, and people worry that their grading doesn't look perfect, but it is so deep inside your garment, no one is ever going to see it. So it's not something to worry about, but it is really important to do. It really can make the difference between what I call Becky Homeki garment and something that people will not believe that you made it because it looks so pro. Okay. So I have trimmed, and I'm sure because it's blue on blue on blue, you're not going to be able to see it, but now I'm going to use my ham again. For any curve, I'm using the ham. This is my stay stitching, this white that's showing, and I can get that out later. But I'm going to press my neckline nice and flat right where the bias strip meets the front of the dress. And I'm not being a good example with press cloth, but do as I say, not as I do. I do like to kind of see what I'm doing. And I feel like it's going to take a little longer with the press cloth. And you can see my stay stitching. I got a little out of bounds. So I will just rip those stitches later. Another cool thing about wool is that there's not going to be any holes when I rip these stitches. It'll all fill in. Okay, so this is the wrong side, and I've pressed the neckline up, and then this is the right side. And if you watched my sewing with knits videos, the method for that neckline was a little bit different than the one for this one. For this one, we're pulling the bias strip all the way to the front, the whole bias strip. So the seam that I sewed is going to be right on top. And this is going to be a little bit fiddly. I'm actually going to start on this side so that you don't have to watch the whole thing, and I can show you how I'm going to get it in place, and then I can start sewing it, and then you don't have to watch the whole thing because that could be boring. And I'm going to use my pinning to the ironing surface method, which I really like. So here I'm on my ham, and I have the top seam up here, the seam of sewing the bias strip to the dress is right along the top, and I'm just going to pin it in place. And I have glass head pins, so I can press right on top. Even if I squish the pin down, it's not going to melt. Okay, and then I'm going to pin this in place. And so I will do it for the whole front neck binding. And you can see that I can get things nice and flat with this nice curve of the ham. So now I'm going to go over to the machine, and I'm going to top stitch this. So whenever I top stitch, I like to use some kind of guide, and this FOF has a cute little foot that has a lip in it. It seems like all machines have feet that help with all your techniques, but they all have different feet for top stitching. And with this one, I'm going to move my needle over because I like to be right near the edge with my top stitching. And I'm putting the foot down, and I have the edge of the bias strip tucked right into the little lip in my foot. And I'll do a couple, and I'm doing this in white, and if Rachel doesn't like it, since this is her dress, I can rip it out and do it in blue, but I am just not used to the back stitching mechanism on this. It kept going back. Okay, so now I've got a really good secure stitch at the beginning there. And I do have the dual feet on, which is especially important when you're top stitching. And I'm just gonna go until the end of my pinning, and I will finish the rest up off camera, but I want to make sure. Okay, I'm going to do a little back stitch right in the front because, you know, you love to see that in the front of your garment. So there is the start of sewing down the front neckline. And I will finish that, and then we'll do the back neckline and the shoulder seams and the yoke next. We'll do we'll do so here, I'll show you. When I press that in place, I think it will lie really nicely. And I will do the shoulder seams and the back neckline and the yoke on Wednesday. And today is the last day of the shop hop that we're participating in Western Montana. So if you haven't hopped yet, come on down and you can win valuable prizes and check out lots of different stores in this part of the world. So thanks for watching, and I will see you on Wednesday at noon Mountain Time. And until then, stay warm. It's freaking freezing here, and I'll see you soon. Thanks. Bye.